The night was freezing, the kind of cold that cuts through every layer of clothing and settles deep inside your bones. Layla pulled her torn shawl tighter around her thin body as she walked slowly down the empty road. Her worn sandals had cracks along the soles, and each step sent a sting of cold through her feet. She was so hungry that her stomach felt like it was twisting in on itself. This was her life now. At 23 years old, she had no home, no family, and no one to lean on. Every evening, she searched behind restaurants and market stalls, hoping to find something left over that people had thrown away. Tonight was no different. As she turned into a narrow back alley behind a row of small shops, she pulled the edge of her shawl over her nose. The air smelled of old cooking oil, rotting vegetables, and wet cardboard boxes. She sighed. This was her world. She was still young, but she already felt like the years had taken everything from her. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the quiet night, a low, weak groan. Layla stopped walking. Her eyes moved carefully around the dark alley until they landed on something crumpled near an old metal bin. At first, she thought it was just a sleeping man, but when she stepped closer, her breath caught in her chest. It was a man wearing a firefighter's uniform. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, and the side of his jacket was soaked in dark red. Layla's eyes went wide. He had been stabbed. "Oh no," she whispered, kneeling down beside him. Her hands shook. His skin was pale. His lips were cracked and dry. She leaned forward and could make out the name stitched onto his jacket. It read, Zane. Layla's hands trembled badly. She'd never seen anyone hurt so badly before. She was just a village girl with nothing to her name, not a nurse, not a doctor. But she could not walk away and leave him there to die. "Stay with me," she said quietly, not even knowing if he could hear her. She pressed her palm firmly against one of his wounds. Warm blood seeped between her fingers, and she nearly pulled away, but she forced herself to hold on. He groaned again, his eyes barely opening for a second. They were filled with pain, but also something else, fear, and a small flicker of hope. "I'll get you help. Just hold on. Please hold on." Layla looked around in panic. She had no phone, no way to call for an ambulance. The only chance was to stop a passing vehicle. She stood up, ran to the main road, and waved her arms desperately at the first car she saw. "Please, please stop. There's a man. He's badly hurt," she shouted, but the driver barely looked her way before speeding off into the night. Another vehicle came. She tried again. The driver slowed slightly, looked her up and down, taking in her patched clothes and cracked sandals, then shook his head and drove away. Tears burned in her eyes. They didn't trust her. To them, she was just the dirty, homeless girl from the streets with nothing. No one would stop. Her heart hammered inside her chest. Zane didn't have time to wait. She ran back to him and tried to lift him. He was far heavier than her small frame could handle. She slipped and almost dropped him, but she refused to give in. Inch by inch, she dragged him out of the alley. Every step was agony. Her back burned. Her arms shook badly, but she kept pulling. The city hospital was several streets away. She had passed by it many times, staring at it and wondering what it would feel like to be given real care in a warm bed. Now, she prayed with everything inside her that she could reach it before it was too late. Zane groaned again, his head rolling to one side. Layla gasped, tears streaming freely down her face. "No, no, please don't go," she begged through her sobs. "We're almost there. You're going to be okay." Her voice broke, but she kept her feet moving. The street lights around her blurred through her tears. People walked past, some staring, but none of them offered a hand. She bit her lip and kept dragging. Finally, the glowing green sign of the hospital came into view. Her legs nearly buckled, but she pushed forward until she burst through the main entrance. "Help! Somebody help him!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Nurses rushed out with a stretcher. Within moments, they lifted Zane away and rushed him inside. Lila stood there, chest heaving, her hands and clothes covered in blood. She had nothing No money, no home, no strength left. But tonight, she had kept a man alive. As the hospital doors swung shut behind him, Lila sank onto the cold front steps, exhausted. For the first time in many months, her heart felt something different from fear. It felt hope. Lila sat on the hard plastic chair outside the hospital ward, her fingers still sticky with dried blood. She had tried rinsing them in the restroom sink, but the stains would not fully come out. Her shawl sleeves were darkened and stiff, and the sharp smell of iron still clung to her clothes. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered, even though the hospital was warm inside. It was well past midnight. The hallways had grown quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses moving between rooms. Every time footsteps echoed near her, Lila lifted her head quickly, her heart jumping into her throat, terrified that a doctor would come out and tell her that Zane hadn't made it. She didn't even know this man. She had only seen his face for a few moments while dragging him through the back streets of the city. But the thought of him dying made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was because she had fought so hard for him. Maybe because for one night, someone's life had been in her hands and she had not let go. She rubbed her round belly gently with her palm, whispering softly to herself, "We'll be okay. I'll keep us safe." The baby growing inside her kicked faintly, as if answering her back. Her thoughts drifted to the past, uninvited and heavy, back to the flood that had destroyed the small village home she had grown up in, to her parents' accident that had left her alone too soon, to the relatives who should have taken her in, but it pushed her out instead, like she was nothing, and to the nights she had slept on cold pavements while strangers walked past without seeing her. Her eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. She could not fall apart here, not now. Then the ward doors opened, and a nurse stepped out. Lila was on her feet in an instant. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "He's alive," the nurse said gently. "We stabilized him. It'll take time, but he has a real chance because you brought him in when you did." Lila's knees nearly gave out from relief. She sat back down, pressing her face where her hands. She said a quiet prayer of thanks. But the night was not yet done. A short while later, the hospital entrance doors opened with a firm push. Several men walked in, their polished shoes clicking sharply against the tiled floors. They did not look like regular visitors. Their suits were neatly fitted, their expressions tense and alert. At the center of the group walked a tall man with silver hair combed firmly back, a strong jaw, and a presence that filled the room before he even spoke. His eyes moved across the space with the calm sharpness of a man used to commanding everything around him. Lila shrank back against her seat. The man's gaze locked onto the approaching doctor. "Where is my son?" His voice was deep and measured, but underneath it was fear pressed down tightly. The doctor nodded respectfully. "Mr. Harrington, your son is in critical care. He came through surgery, but it was very close. He lost a significant amount of blood." Lila's breath caught in her throat. Harrington. That name settled in her memory like a stone dropping into still water. She had heard it spoken in the city before. Not just any wealthy man. He was the founder and head of Harrington Global, the largest privately owned development and energy company in the country. Some newspapers called him the most powerful private citizen alive. His family name was tied to skyscrapers, oil fields, shipping fleets, and a fortune that people whispered was worth trillions. And this man, this giant of a man, was the father of the firefighter she had dragged through the back alleys. Harrington turned to the doctor again. "You said it was close. What exactly happened?" The doctor paused, then looked quietly toward Lila. "He wouldn't have survived if she hadn't found him and brought him in herself when you did." For the first time, Harrington's sharp gaze moved toward Lila. She felt her heart stumble under the weight of those eyes. She looked down quickly, afraid he would see everything in her face, the hunger, the shame she carried everywhere. "You?" he asked. His voice wasn't cruel, but it was heavy with disbelief. Lila swallowed. "Yes, sir." Harrington stepped closer. "Your name?" "Lila." Her voice cracked on the single word. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes quietly reading her torn shawl, her thin frame, her exhausted face. She expected him to dismiss her, but instead, something in his expression shifted, softened in the slightest way. "You saved my son," he said. Layla shook her head quickly. "I just did what I had to. Anyone would have done the same." But she knew that wasn't true. Dozens of cars had sped past her in the street. Dozens of strangers had turned their eyes away. She alone had not walked on. "Tell me about yourself," Harrington said, his tone gentler now. Layla's lips opened, but she hesitated. How did you put years of loss into a few sentences? But his eyes, for all their sharpness, carried an honesty that made her speak. "I studied architecture at the city university," she whispered. "I wanted to design buildings, communities, something that mattered. But when my parents passed, my family took everything. I was pushed out. I had to drop out." She paused, resting her hand protectively over her belly. "I've been living on the streets since then." The hallway was completely still. Harrington's staff exchanged glances, their eyes wide, but Harrington himself only nodded slowly, as though quietly putting together a picture he had already begun to see. The doctor cleared his throat. "Sir, I want to be clear. Without her, your son would not be alive tonight." Harrington took a long, steady breath. Then his voice came out firm and certain. "Then from tonight, this young woman will not spend another night on the street." Layla blanked. "Sir?" Harrington continued. "You studied architecture. You will finish your studies. I will personally arrange it. And until then, you will work at Harrington Global in a role we find fitting for your abilities. You will have a home, a vehicle, whatever you need." Layla stared at him, completely still. Just hours ago, she had been searching rubbish bins for leftover food, and now a man whose fortune was beyond anything she could imagine was offering her a future. Tears gathered in her eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. "Why would you do this for me?" Harrington's voice softened in a way that reached past his powerful exterior. "Because you saved my son, and because I see something in you, Layla. Something the world tried very hard to destroy, and failed." Layla pressed her hands to her mouth and wept quietly. For years she had been invisible, a shadow moving through a world that did not see her, and now someone looked directly at her. Harrington turned to his staff. "See that she's taken care of tonight. A house, clothing, a car. Tomorrow she begins at Harrington Global." His staff nodded at once. Layla sat trembling. Her entire world had been turned upside down in a single night. She had gone from hopeless to chosen. And as she whispered a quiet thank you, she didn't yet know this was only the beginning. Morning light filtered through thin curtains into a small but clean hotel room. Layla awoke with a start, confused for a moment about where she was. Then the memories came rushing back. The alley, the blood, the hospital, Mr. Harrington's promise. A gentle knock came at the door. "Miss Layla?" A warm, even voice called. "My name is Daniel. Mr. Harrington sent me." She opened the door a little. A well-dressed man stood in the corridor, a small, kind smile on his face, and a Harrington Global badge on his lapel. "I'm here to take you to your new home," he said. "My home?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, the words simply, as if they were the most ordinary thing in the world. To Layla, they felt like something from a dream she had stopped letting herself have. She grabbed the small cloth bag that held everything she owned, a worn head covering, a broken comb, and her old student ID from the university. Daniel led her down to a dark car waiting by the pavement. As they drove through the city, the streets looked different, cleaner, somehow, lighter. For months she had seen this city from doorways and alley corners, curled up against the cold. Now she watched it pass through a car window like a person who belonged somewhere. They turned onto a quiet street lined with young trees. The car stopped in front of a modest cream-colored house with a small front garden and a white wooden fence. It was not grand or showy, but it was perfect. Fresh paint, a neat red ribbon on the front door handle. Daniel handed her a key. "Welcome home." Her hand trembled as she unlocked the door. The smell of clean linen and fresh soap filled the air. There was a small sitting room with a soft couch, a dining table near the window, and a bright kitchen with clean white tiles. On the counter sat a sealed envelope. She opened it. "Welcome, Layla. Your courage gave my son back to me. Let this house be your fresh start. Harrington." Tears blurred her eyes. On the kitchen table sat a basket filled with fruit, bread, fresh milk, and tea. The refrigerator hummed quietly, already stocked with simple food. In the bedroom, a wide bed waited under a clean duvet. New clothes hung in the wardrobe, smart tops, simple trousers, flat shoes, and a pair of low heels in a box on the floor. There was even a soft blue dress she would never have dared pick for herself. She went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. Hot water, real hot water, ran over her back. She pressed her palm to her belly. We're safe. We're finally safe. When she stepped outside again, she found one more thing waiting for her. A compact silver car sat at the curb with a ribbon across the bonnet. Daniel smiled from the doorway. "The papers are in the glove box. It's yours. You don't have to drive today. I'll take you to the office." She nodded, still dazed. "Thank you." On the ride to the company building, Daniel kept the conversation light. "I've worked with Mr. Harrington for 11 years, he said. He's direct and expects results, but he never forgets when someone does the right thing." "I don't understand why he did all this for me," Layla said quietly. Daniel replied without hesitation. "You saved his son. That's everything to him." The Harrington Global Tower was tall and glass-fronted, the kind of building that seemed to hold the sky inside it. The lobby was wide and calm. A receptionist with bright, warm eyes and her hair pinned neatly looked up from the front desk. "You must be Layla," she said, smiling. "I'm Priya. Welcome." Priya handed her a visitor badge and walked her to a small meeting room where a woman from the HR department named Mrs. O'Coffer sat with a neat stack of forms. They set up Layla's staff ID, email access, and workstation assignment. She signed everything carefully, reading each page before putting pen to paper. Mrs. O'Coffer showed her the staff kitchen, the rest area, and the women's restroom, where someone had placed a small vase of fresh flowers by the mirror. Everything still felt impossible and real at the same time. "Mr. Harrington would like to see you," Mrs. O'Coffer said. They took the elevator to the top floor. The hallway up there was quiet, with framed photographs of completed developments and community projects along the walls. At the far end stood a large corner office with glass on two sides. Mr. Harrington looked up from his desk. He stood when she entered. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Grateful," she said honestly. "Good." His voice was firm but carried warmth beneath it. "You'll start today with foundational work, project file reviews, meeting scheduling, and basic research tasks. We'll build from there. Ask questions whenever you have them. I respect people who ask questions." He pressed a button on his phone. "Send in Ms. Adeyemi." A composed, sharp-eyed woman entered. "This is Ms. Adeyemi, Senior Project Associate. She'll guide you through your first week." Ms. Adeyemi shook Layla's hand firmly. "Come with me. Let's get you set up." They walked to a smaller office near a large window overlooking the city below. A computer sat on the desk, along with a fresh notebook and pen. On the chair rested a small navy blazer with a card on top. "Layla, we have a 2 o'clock client review call. Before that, sort these project files by region and proposal date. Then I'll walk you through how to manage Mr. Harrington's scheduling system." Layla took a steady breath. She knew how to sort. She knew how to read fast and catch small details. Her old architecture courses had trained her in that. She worked with quiet, careful focus. When Ms. Adeyemi checked her progress an hour later, she gave a firm nod. "You're thorough," she said. "I appreciate that." Layla's cheeks warmed. "Thank you." At midday, Priya from the front desk appeared carrying a small box. "For Mr. Harrington," she said with a smile. Inside was a sandwich, an orange, and a handwritten note. Eat. Long day ahead. Layla laughed softly and ate at her desk. By afternoon, she was updating project schedules, drafting a short memo from Ms. Adeyemi's notes, and preparing a folder for the evening meeting. Each time she got something right, something small brightened inside her. Each time she heard "well done," that brightness grew. At 4 in the afternoon, Mr. Harrington called her upstairs. Several senior staff stood gathered in a circle. Department heads, Ms. Adeyemi, the office manager, and a group of senior associates. Layla felt small among them, but Harrington was steady and clear. "Everyone," he said, "this is Layla. She saved my son. She joins our team starting today." He paused, then added, "She will also serve as my executive assistant for the time being. Requests involving my schedule or project briefings go through her first." There was a brief pause, then applause moved around the room. A tall, broad man with a kind face, Mr. Calloway, the company's co-director and Harrington's longtime partner, stepped forward and shook her hand warmly. "Welcome, Layla. Truly welcome." Others followed. Smiles, nods, warm words. But one face did not join them. He stood slightly apart from the group, one hand in his pocket. A young man in an expensive suit, his posture relaxed in the way of someone who had never once had to earn his place. His eyes moved across Layla with a look that was flat and cold. He gave the smallest nod, one that felt more like a quiet warning than any kind of greeting. His name was Marcus. She didn't know it yet, but she felt the chill of it settle somewhere in her chest. The moment passed quickly. Work moved forward. At 5:30, Miss Adeyemi stopped by Layla's desk. "You did well today. Go rest early. You have a lot to learn still, but you'll learn it fast." "Thank you," Layla said sincerely, but she wasn't going straight home. She asked Daniel to drive her to the hospital. On the way, she stopped at a small food stall and bought hot broth and a small carton of fresh juice. She carried them up to the ward in a paper bag. Zane was awake when she came in. He looked tired still, but his eyes were clear and steady. A neat bandage showed at the collar of his hospital gown. "You again," he said with a weak but genuine smile. "My hero." Layla laughed, shy. "I brought you broth. I don't know if they'll let you have it, but it's still warm." "You saved my life," he said quietly. "Now you're bringing soup. That doesn't seem fair. I owe you far too much." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Just get well." He studied her face for a moment. "You look different today. There's something lighter about you." "I started working," she said, still amazed by the sound of those words, "at your father's company." He raised his eyebrows. "Already? He really doesn't waste any time." "No," she agreed with a small smile. "He doesn't." Zane smiled back. "I'm glad. You deserve good things, Layla. I mean that." They talked for a while, about the nurses, the food, the way the late afternoon light came through the ward window. When a nurse arrived to check his chart, Layla stood. "I'll come again tomorrow," she said. "I'll be here," he said, lifting his hand lightly. She pressed it, once, warm and quick, then left before her eyes could blur with tears. Outside, the evening air smelled like coming rain. Daniel drove her back to the cream house on the quiet street. The porch light clicked on as she walked up the front steps. She set the paper bag on the kitchen counter, washed her hands, and put the kettle on. She took the blue dress from the wardrobe and hung it where she could see it from the bed, a small promise of better days coming. She sat on the edge of the mattress and wrote in the new notebook from her desk. Day 1. I worked. People used my name. I helped. Zane smiled. We are safe. She placed the notebook in the drawer, touched her belly gently, and whispered goodnight to her baby. Then she lay back on the soft white duvet and let the quiet hum of the warm house wrap around her. For the first time in a long time, sleep came quickly, and it was gentle. Layla awoke the next morning to the sound of birds outside her window. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. It was a strange feeling,
waking in a bed that was actually hers. She pressed her hand into the soft sheet beside her, half expecting it all to disappear like so many dreams had before. But it didn't. The cream house was real. The wardrobe with clean clothes was real. The silver car parked outside with her name in the papers was real. She smiled faintly as she sat up, resting her hand over her belly. "We made it another day," she whispered. At the office, Layla began to settle properly into her role. She quickly understood that Harrington Global was not just a large company, it was the company. The lobby floors shone like mirrors, the offices smelled of strong coffee and polished wood, and everyone who worked there moved with clear purpose. Many took a moment to greet her each morning. "Good morning, Layla," an associate said cheerfully. "Good to have you with us," another added. Priya at the front desk always smiled when she passed. Mrs. Okafor from HR stopped by regularly to ask if she needed anything. Even Miss Adiemi, who rarely spent words, had said quietly, "Solid work yesterday," before walking into a meeting. Layla moved through the hallways with a steady mix of nerves and something she was slowly beginning to recognize as belonging. For once, people didn't look through her like she didn't exist. They looked at her like she mattered. But not everyone felt that way. It started quietly, a pair of eyes that followed her a beat too long in the staff lounge, a half smile that never quite reached warmth. Marcus. She had learned his name quickly enough. He was the son of Mr. Calloway, Harrington's co-director and closest old friend. Unlike his warm, generous father, Marcus moved through the office with a sense of ownership, his chute always sharply pressed, his handshake always short, his eyes always calculating. He had the look of someone who had been handed everything and expected it to keep coming. At first, Layla tried not to let herself notice. She was new. Maybe she was reading too much into it. But by the end of her first week, she could no longer pretend otherwise. One afternoon, Layla was alone in the filing room, sorting documents by project date, when Marcus stepped inside. The energy of the room shifted immediately. "So," he said, leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, "you're the one everyone keeps talking about." Layla kept her eyes on the files. "I just did what needed to be done." "Don't be modest," he said, his tone smooth but sharp underneath. "You dragged a man through the streets and landed yourself a house, a car, and a job people spent years working towards, all in one night. That's quite a story." Layla looked up briefly, unsure what to say. Marcus let a slow smile cross his face. "Funny how things fall into place when you're in the right alley at the right moment." She turned back to her papers. "It wasn't luck, it was survival." His smile thinned. "You think you've actually earned your place here? You think these people are going to accept you long-term? You're a charity case, Layla, nothing more." Her chest tightened, but she kept her breathing even. "If that's your opinion, that's your right. Excuse me, I have work to finish." She walked past him, her heartbeat quick against her ribs. His voice followed her into the hallway. "We'll see how long this lasts." That evening, Layla drove to the hospital. The tension from the day melted the moment she saw Zane sitting up straighter, his color returned, his smile real when she came through the door. "You look tired," he said, studying her face. I laughed lightly. "It's a big company. I think everyone looks tired." He smiled, then grew serious. "Has anyone given you a hard time?" Layla hesitated. She thought of Marcus, the sharpness in his voice, the way his words were meant to cut, but she didn't want to put that weight on Zane while he was still healing.
"Nothing I can't handle," she said softly. He reached over and took her hand, his grip still gentle but sure. "You're stronger than you realize, Lila. Don't let anyone take that from you." Her eyes softened. She held his hand back, letting his words settle around her like shelter. The weeks that followed passed quickly. Zane's recovery moved faster than the doctors had predicted. Every day she visited, he was sitting a little more upright, talking a little more easily. Soon he was walking the length of the ward with barely a hand on the rail. One bright morning, Lila arrived at the hospital with his favorite orange juice, only to find his bed empty and neatly made. Her heart stopped, until a nurse came over quickly. "Don't panic, he was discharged this morning, early." A pang of sadness pressed at her. She hadn't been there to say goodbye. But that same afternoon, as she stepped out of the Harrington Global building into the warm evening air, she heard a familiar voice. "Need a lift?" She turned. A dark SUV was parked at the curb, and Zane leaned out of the open window with a wide, easy grin. Lila laughed in surprise. "You're supposed to be resting." "I rest better when I'm not alone," he said, eyes bright. "Come on, dinner's on me." From that evening forward, their friendship grew into something neither of them had a proper word for yet. He would meet her after work and walk with her in the park near her house. On weekends, they wandered along the wide river path at the edge of the city, sometimes talking for hours about the lives they had come from, the fears they still carried, and the futures they were only beginning to picture. Lila had never known such steady peace. Zane did not treat her like something fragile. He did not make her feel like she was being looked after. With him, she could laugh freely. With him, she felt ordinary in the best possible way. One clear evening, they sat on a low hill outside the city edge. The night air was soft. The sky above them stretched wide and full of stars. Zane turned to her, his voice quiet. "When I was lying in that alley, I genuinely thought it was finished for me. And then I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was your face. I haven't forgotten that moment, not for a single day." Lila's throat tightened. "I only did what I had to." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Anyone else would have walked past. You didn't. You pulled me back." The silence between them filled with the sound of crickets and a light breeze moving through the grass. Zane reached for Lila's hand. Lila didn't pull away. And then, under the wide dark sky with its scatter of stars, he leaned in slowly. Their lips met, soft, careful, and exactly right. Lila closed her eyes. For the first time in as long as she could remember, the world gave her something purely beautiful. The office was quiet that evening. Most of the lights had been switched off, and the rows of desks sat still in the dim glow of the ceiling panels. Lila carried a stack of project folders down the corridor, hoping to finish her notes before Zane came to meet her. They had planned to get dinner together, and just the thought of sitting across from him made the end of the workday feel lighter. She turned toward the restroom, but as she passed Marcus's office, she stopped walking. The door was open just slightly, and voices carried through the gap. "The man we hired made a complete mess of it," a voice said, deep, cold, and tight with frustration. Lila recognized it immediately. Mr. Calloway, Marcus's father, Harrington's co-director and oldest friend. Marcus's voice came through next, bitter and clipped. "I told you we needed more time. I told you. Now Zane is walking around like nothing happened, and the whole company is treating that woman like some kind of savior." Lila's heart beat hard in her ears. They were talking about Zane, about her. She pressed herself close to the wall, barely breathing. Calloway's voice sharpened. "If that girl hadn't dragged him to the hospital, he'd be dead right now. Dead, Marcus, and Harrington Global would be ours by succession. But no, thanks to her, everything is back where it started." Lila clutched the folders to her chest, her fingers white. This had not been a random attack. The stabbing had been planned. They had paid someone to kill Zane. She pressed the backs of her mouth to keep herself silent as Marcus spoke again. "So what do we do now? Harrington trusts her completely. She's in his firm, his home, his plans. She's ruined everything we worked for." A pause. Then Calloway said slowly and quietly, "If she finds out too much, we won't have a choice. She'll have to be removed from the picture." Lila's blood went cold. They were talking about ending her life. Her mind raced. She needed to warn Zane. She needed to tell Mr. Harrington what his partner was planning. But her legs refused to move. She was pressed flat against the wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was afraid they might hear it.
And then it happened. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. The buzz was loud in the silence of the empty hallway. On the screen, Zane's name lit up. He was calling, ready to pick her up. Marcus's voice cut through the wall like a blade. "Did you hear that?" Footsteps crossed the office floor. The door swung open. Marcus appeared in the wedge of light, his eyes finding her immediately. "You!" His voice was ice. Lila turned to run, but Marcus moved fast, his hand locking around her wrist. The folders fell from her arms, scattering across the floor. "Let me go!" she cried, but he shoved her back into the office. Calloway's face darkened when he saw her. "Did you hear how much?" demanded Calloway. "Enough," Lila said, her voice shaking but direct. "You arranged for someone to kill Zane. Both of you. I heard everything." Marcus slammed the office door behind her, his expression twisted with fury. "You should have stayed in your lane." She backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Marcus grabbed a coil of thin rope from a shelf near the wall and forced her into the chair. She fought back, kicking, pushing, but he was far stronger. The rope bit into her wrists as he pulled it tight behind her back. "Please," she begged, her eyes wet. "You don't have to do this." Marcus said nothing. He tore a strip of tape from a roll on the desk and pressed it firmly across her mouth. Muffled cries stuck in her throat. Mr. Calloway paced the floor, his hands running through his hair. "This has gone terribly wrong." Marcus snapped at him. "Then we fix it tonight. She is not going to tell Harrington anything." Lila's chest rose and fell rapidly. She strained against the rope, but it only cut deeper into her skin. She thought of Zane. He was probably pulling up outside the building right now, wondering where she was. She thought of the baby inside her. She twisted her wrists harder, desperate. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Henry leaned against the desk, watching her with a cold, satisfied look. "You thought you were clever, staying late, wandering the hallway? Now look."
Calloway paced near the window, his face lined with stress. "Marcus, this has gone too far. If Harrington finds out, he won't find out," Marcus cut him off. "Not if we move quickly." And then, footsteps. Steady, familiar footsteps in the corridor outside. Layla's whole body tensed with sudden hope. "Layla!" Zane's voice came through the hallway. "You still in here?" She tried to kick the chair leg against the floor to make noise, but Calloway moved fast, pressing a heavy hand over the tape at her mouth to muffle even the muffled sound. The office door pushed slightly open. Zane stood there, tall in his jacket, scanning the room. Marcus was already on his feet, moving to block his view of the far corner where Layla sat tied behind the desk. "Zane," Marcus said smoothly. "Working late?" Zane's eyes moved across the room slowly. "I'm here for Layla. We had plans. Have you seen her?" Marcus shrugged easily. "She wasn't feeling well. She headed out maybe 20 minutes ago. You just missed her." Zane's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes dropped to the project folders scattered across the floor. Layla's folders. "Strange," he said evenly. "She hasn't picked up my calls." Marcus gave a light laugh. "You know how it is. Maybe she switched her phone off. She said her head was pounding." From behind the desk, Layla forced her heel down against the floor with everything she had. The sound was sharp. Zane's head turned slightly. What was that? His hand moved instinctively toward his side. Marcus didn't blink. Old building, the pipes settle at night. You know how these old offices are. A long silence stretched. Zane's eyes searched Marcus's face carefully. Layla thought, she was almost certain, that he would step past him, that he would look further into the room, but instead he exhaled slowly. "I'll check her house." His footsteps faded. The main door clicked shut. Layla's chest caved with despair. She had been so close. The moment Zane's vehicle pulled away from the building, Marcus's composure dropped entirely. He turned to his father, his voice sharp and urgent. "He's suspicious. We can see that. We can't keep her here." Calloway's face was pale. "Marcus, I'm telling you, this has already gone too far." "It went too far the moment she pressed her ear to that wall," Marcus said, dragging Layla's chair roughly across the tiles toward the back corridor. She struggled hard, kicking, throwing her weight side to side, but he gripped the chair with both hands and kept moving. Her heels screeched against the floor. He yanked her upright and shoved her toward the back exit. The night air hit her face like cold water. The rear car park was nearly empty under the stuttering light of a single lamp. A dark van sat idling near the far edge.
"Get in," Marcus ordered. Layla planted her feet. He and his father pushed her forward until she stumbled and fell onto the metal floor of the van. The doors slammed behind her. Marcus climbed in, and Calloway took the wheel. The engine revved, and the van moved fast out of the car park and into the dark streets. Layla's mind raced even as her body was pinned down. She had to think. She needed one chance, just one. Her fingers worked carefully in the darkness. The rope was tight, but her jacket pocket was close. She twisted her wrists, her skin burning until her fingertips grazed the edge of her phone. She pulled it free slowly, hiding the movement with her body. No time for a call. Marcus would hear her voice, but a message, a location. Her thumbs trembled as she unlocked the screen by feel and pressed share location, then typed a single shaking word, help. She hit send. The soft tap of it was swallowed by the noise of the road. She pushed the phone back into her pocket just as Marcus leaned forward. "What are you doing back there?" She shook her head rapidly, making her expression wide and frightened, which wasn't hard. He sat back, muttering. Miles behind the van, Zane had pulled up in front of Layla's house. Dark windows, no sign of life. He called her phone again, no answer. Then his screen lit up, her live location, one message, help. His stomach dropped. He picked up his radio. "All units, I need immediate backup. Track this number and follow my coordinates." He was already turning the vehicle around before the response came. Within minutes, 3 police response cars fell in behind him as he drove hard towards the pulsing dot on his screen. His jaw was set, his hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. He had almost lost her once, not again. The van turned off the main road onto gravel, then deeper into the trees at the edge of the city. Branches scraped the roof. The headlights caught only narrow strips of dirt track. Finally, the van rolled to a stop in a small clearing. Marcus hauled Layla out. Her shoes sunk into damp soil. The night was cold and full of the sound of insects. Marcus raised his arm, the small weapon catching the thin light. "This is as far as you go." Layla shook her head frantically. Tears ran down her face. She prayed with every part of her, "Find me, please find me." And then sirens, sharp and close, red and blue lights split between the trees. Engines tore through the clearing, doors flew open, voices shouted through the trees. Armed police, "Drop the weapon, drop it now." Marcus spun around, caught completely off guard. A shot cracked through the air. He screamed as it hit his shoulder, the weapon flying from his hand. He hit the ground hard. Officers moved in from every direction. Calloway raised both hands instantly, his whole body shaking. I surrender, please." 2 officers rushed to Layla, cutting the rope from her wrists and peeling the tape free. "Easy, you're safe now," one said gently. But before she could respond, strong arms pulled her up and into a hold she recognized without needing to look.
Zane. His face was fierce, his eyes sharp with the kind of focus that comes right after real fear. But when his eyes met hers, everything in him softened. He pulled her close and held her like she might disappear. "You're safe," he said against her hair. "I'm right here." Lila gripped his jacket and sobbed into his chest. "I thought you wouldn't find me in time." "I will always find you," he said firmly. "Do you hear me? Always." She pulled back just enough to see his face, dirt on his cheek, sweat at his temple. But to her, he was the steadiest thing in the world. Marcus groaned on the ground, clutching his shoulder as officers pulled him upright. Calloway stood in handcuffs, head down, shoulders collapsed. The flashing lights moved across their faces, red, blue, as everything they had built on greed and lies fell apart around them. Zane guided Lila gently toward one of the response vehicles. "It's over," he said again quietly. But for Lila, the only sound that mattered was the steady beat of his heart under her hand. The police station buzzed with movement, phones, voices, footsteps, the rustle of paperwork. But to Lila, it all felt like it was happening slightly underwater. She sat on a bench in a side corridor, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had brought her, a cup of warm tea in her raw hands. Her wrists were marked from the rope, her throat was dry, but she was alive.
Zane sat close beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, his eyes moving to her a few moments as though reassuring himself she was still there. "You're safe," he said quietly for what felt like the 10th time. Lila nodded, but the images still moved through her mind. Marcus's arm raised, the cold clearing, the terror that had spread through her chest like ice water. She leaned into Zane and drew steadiness from the simple fact of him being beside her. Miss Lila, a senior detective in a gray jacket, approached with a folder and a calm professional manner. "When you're ready, we'll need your full account of the evening. Take your time." Lila wrapped both hands around the cup. "I'm ready." They led her to a small interview room. Zane stayed nearby, though he let her speak for herself. The detective switched on the recorder. "Please walk us through everything you heard and everything that followed." Lila took a slow breath and began. She described staying late. She described passing Marcus's office, hearing his voice and his father's, and then the words, the assassin, the plan, the succession they had arranged. She described the moment her phone gave her away, the rope, the tape, the van, the clearing. She described sending the location message in the dark. Her voice cracked in places, but she kept going. "They planned it deliberately," she said clearly. "They arranged for someone to kill Zane so Marcus could inherit the company. They admitted it between themselves. I heard every word." The detective nodded steadily. "That's exactly what we needed. Thank you, Miss Lila. What you did tonight, both in that office and in that van, took real courage." Hours later, Mr. Harrington arrived. He walked into the station like a man carrying weight he hadn't put down in years. His suit jacket was open, his tie loose, his eyes heavy. But when he saw Zane, standing, whole, unharmed, something in his face gave way entirely. "Son," he said the word quietly and pulled him to a long embrace. Zane was still for a moment, then returned it. Lila watched from a few feet away, her eyes bright. For a moment they were not businessman and firefighter, not the powerful father and his independent son. They were simply two people who had nearly lost each other. Then Harrington composed himself and turned toward the holding area. Through the glass, Mr. Calloway sat on the bench inside. His expensive jacket was crumpled. His face was the color of old paper. Harrington walked to the door and stood there. His hands were still. His voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Why, Calloway? Why would you do this to my son?" Calloway looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Harrington, I swear I never wanted it to reach this point. I only wanted Marcus to have something his own. You have always favored Zane. Everything, every opportunity, every board decision, it went to him. My boy deserved something too." Harrington's jaw tightened. "And so you hired someone to murder mine." Calloway pressed his face toward the glass, his voice breaking. "I lost my way. Greed clouded everything. I never imagined it would become this." Harrington stepped back. When he spoke again, his voice was flat and final. "You weren't just my business partner, Calloway. You were the closest thing I had to a brother for 30 years, and you tried to destroy my family." He turned and walked away without another word. The corridor was silent, except for the sound of his footsteps. Calloway sat back on the bench, his head dropping forward into his hands. The medical update came through within the hour. Marcus had survived. The bullet had torn through his shoulder but missed anything vital. He would recover physically, but his life as he had known it was gone. The detective briefed Harrington, Zane, and Lila together. With Miss Lila's testimony, the recorded evidence, and the kidnapping, Marcus faces life imprisonment. His father will face a significant sentence as well. The courts will be thorough. Lila exhaled slowly. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. How could you feel satisfied at watching two lives collapse completely? But it was relief. Real, deep relief. Justice was coming. She walked outside with Zane as the sun began to come up.
The sky over the city was turning gold at the edges. The air smelled clean. For the first time in weeks, she stood in the open morning and felt no fear of it. "You were incredibly brave," Zane said beside her. Lila glanced at him in mild surprise. "Brave? Zane, I was terrified every single moment."
He looked at her steadily. Being brave doesn't mean the fear isn't there. It means you act through it, and you did, every step of the way. Her eyes stung. She had once been someone no one listened to, someone the city moved around without seeing. But her voice had mattered tonight. It had saved lives. Zane reached up and placed his hand gently against her cheek. "I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into that alley," he said, "but I thank God every single day that you did." Lila smiled softly. "And I thank God you drove into that car park tonight." They stood together as the morning grew brighter around them. The noise and chaos of the night faded behind them. Weeks later, the trial concluded swiftly and clearly. Marcus was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. His father received a lengthy sentence alongside him. The company was restructured. Callaway's name was removed from everything. Harrington Global stood on its own, stronger, cleaner, and with Lila now officially enrolled in her final year of architecture studies, supported fully by the company that had become her home. Derek, Zane, sat with her the evening after the verdict was announced. He held her hand and said simply, "It's over." Lila nodded, and the tears that came were ones she had been holding for a very long time. "Yes," she said, "it really is." The courtyard was filled with the scent of jasmine and warm earth. White chairs curved in neat rows along either side of the aisle. Soft music drifted through the late afternoon air, and small lanterns hung in the trees above, glowing gold in the early evening light. Guests spoke in low, happy voices as they turned to watch the entrance. Lila stood just beyond the garden arch, her fingers light around the stems of white lilies in her hands. A seamstress from the city had made the gown for her, soft ivory fabric that moved like water, a simple veil that brushed against her jaw. She pressed her palm to her belly, full now with the weight of a new life almost ready to begin, and breathed in slowly and out again. "You look completely beautiful," Priya said from beside her, carefully adjusting the veil. Lila smiled, uncertain. "Do you really think so?" Priya held her gaze. "I think you look like someone who finally knows where she belongs." The music lifted. The garden doors opened. Every guest rose. Lila stepped forward onto the aisle, her heart going so fast it was almost loud. Faces turned towards her. Colleagues, neighbors, people who had once seemed far beyond her reach. They weren't watching her with pity or polite curiosity. They were watching her with genuine warmth. Her eyes moved through the crowd until they found the one face she had been searching for. Zane, standing at the far end of the aisle, tall and still in his dark suit. His eyes came to hers and held there, steady and soft, and full of everything they had been through. Lila felt her breath steady. She had once dragged this man's broken body through the back streets of the city, fighting for his life in the dark. Now she was walking towards him, and toward everything that came next. When she reached him, Zane extended his hand. His touch was warm and sure. "You made it," he said quietly, with a smile. She laughed through the tears she hadn't realized were on her face. "We both did." The officiant's voice was calm and clear. "Marriage is not a shelter from life's difficulties. It is the decision to face them side by side. Today, Lila and Zane choose each other, not because life has been easy, but because love gave them the strength to keep walking through it." Zane spoke first, his voice steady. "Lila, the night you found me, I thought everything was ending, but you turned it into a beginning. You pulled me out of the dark more than once. You reminded me that love doesn't have to be earned, it can simply be given.
I promise to stand beside you, to protect you, to be someone worthy of the courage you carry." Tears ran freely down Lila's face. She took a breath and found her voice. "Zane, I didn't know what safety felt like until I knew you. I was broken and invisible, and you looked directly at me. With you, I found hope again. I promise to love you, to laugh with you, to hold your hand through every hard season, and to walk with you for all the ones ahead." The officiant smiled. "May I have the rings?" Mr. Harrington stepped forward from Zane's side, his eyes glistening. He placed the 2 rings carefully into the officiant's hands. His expression, usually firm and guarded, was quietly undone. He watched the young woman who had saved his son's life prepare to become his daughter, and he did not try to hide what that meant to him. Zane placed the band on Lila's finger, his hands completely steady. She did the same for him, her fingers trembling just slightly. "With these rings, you seal everything you have promised. By the power given to me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Zane leaned forward. Their lips met, soft and certain and full of the long road they had walked to arrive here. The garden broke into warm applause. The reception that followed filled the courtyard with laughter and music and the smell of good food. Long tables covered with flowers held generous plates. Children chased each other across the grass. Colleagues from the firm and the company raised their glasses. Mr. Harrington gave a brief speech, his usually firm voice unsteady with feeling. "Lila, you saved my son's life, and in so doing, you gave me back mine. Today I don't gain a daughter-in-law, I gain a daughter. I could not be more grateful or more proud." Lila's cheeks were warm. Tears spilled again as she stood and hugged him tightly. Later, as she danced slowly with Zane beneath the hanging lanterns, he bent close and whispered, "Do you understand how far you have come?" She rested her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I can barely believe it. Not so long ago, I was searching bins for anything to eat." She pulled back to look at him, her hand resting over her belly. "And now I have everything." Zane pressed his lips to her forehead. "You deserve every part of it, every single part." As the evening grew soft and the guests drifted towards the tables and the children settled into quieter corners, Lila slipped out to a small open spot at the edge of the courtyard.
The lanterns glowed behind her. Above, the stars were beginning to appear, the same wide sky she had sat beneath on the hill that night when Zane first kissed her. She stood still and let herself remember the cold alley behind the shops where she had first found him, the weight of his body as she pulled him through the street, the disbelief in her chest when Harrington had looked at her and offered her a life. She remembered Marcus's cold eyes in the office, the terror of the van, the dark clearing, and then the sirens splitting through the trees. She remembered the trial, the verdict, the slow unwinding of fear from around her heart. She touched the ring on her finger. She had been invisible for a long time, a forgotten person in a city full of people, but she had never stopped moving forward, and when the moment came that required everything she had given it. Zane found her there, his hands wrapping gently around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She smiled with her whole face. "The road behind me, and the road still ahead." He pressed his lips to the side of her head. "Whatever comes next, we walk it together." Lila leaned back into him, her heart full and quiet and completely at peace. "Together," she said. Above them, the first stars of the night had come fully out, and somewhere in the warm, lit courtyard behind them, the people she had come to call her family
were laughing and celebrating and alive. Lila closed her eyes and breathed it all in. She was no longer the girl who searched for scraps in the cold, no longer a shadow at the edge of a city that didn't see her. She was Lila, wife, soon to be mother, the woman who had walked through the darkest night and found on the other side of it a dawn she had never dared to imagine. If you enjoyed this story, please share it and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for being here.